So today I want to discuss why I switched my FX6's B-Cam from the A7S3 to the Alpha 1. I'll be comparing the differences between the cameras, and I'll also discuss the different synergies they bring to the FX6. So with all that out of the way, let's get started. So in my view, the A7S3 has been a workhorse of a camera and a terrific B-Cam to use alongside the FX6. I mean, capturing 4K resolution video in a multitude of frame rates, including 120p with no line skipping, and the A7S3's efficient touch tracking autofocus system, high dynamic range, and excellent low light performance, all of that, and it quickly became my favorite video camera long before I filmed with the Sony FX6. And you know, the A7S3 seems like a natural B-Cam to the FX6 in that it fills in the gaps that the FX6 cannot. For instance, the A7S3 has a dedicated viewfinder, and obviously the FX6 doesn't. The A7S3 can take 12 megapixel photos. The FX6 of course cannot. And the A7S3 has built-in stabilization where you can toggle between standard and active. The FX6 cannot perform internal stabilization. You have to instead pivot to Catalyst Browse and Post, making for slower turnaround times. So all this to say, both are excellent 4K video cameras with similar image quality and color science, although I would argue that the A7S3 leans a bit green at times. And even though the FX6 is touted and priced like a higher quality cinema camera, the A7S3 can do something that the FX6 cannot do internally, even after multiple firmware updates, which is 4K 120p without going into S&Q mode. So the video advantages on the A7S3 are numerous, and on the photo end I've done many shoots with the A7S3 as a photo camera. And one thing that is often understated in these conversations about the A7S3 is its photo capabilities. However, this leads me to where the Alpha 1 comes in. So I had a series of photo shoots in 2021 and I needed a high megapixel count for those particular shoots. Consequently, the A7S3 would not cut it. And while 12 megapixel images are generally sufficient for my use cases, a higher megapixel count was required for this project. So I opted for another camera and I rented the Alpha 1. And after shooting with the A1 alongside rented lenses like the 50mm f1.2G Master, as well as lenses that I own, like the 55mm f1.8 and the 135mm f1.8, I was simply stunned by this camera's performance almost instantaneously. And that could at least be partially attributed to the new dual Bions XR processor in camera. 50 megapixel images, 1/400th of a second flash sync speed, low light autofocus, and high burst modes of up to 30 frames compressed RAW are impressive specs. When it comes to B camera synergy, the A7S3 and now the FX3 are the best value options for B cameras to the FX6. If we're talking strictly video, both cameras feature internal 4K recording without line skipping, and I would even give the edge to the FX3 after firmware 2.0 as it now gives the FX3 time code, as well as Cine EI and custom LUTs. So if both of those cameras are better value options for video, why did I go with the A1? Or better yet, what does the Alpha 1 bring to the FX6 as a B-Cam that the other two cameras don't? Well, this is highly dependent on your use cases. So for me, I need a high megapixel count stills camera, and while the 12 megapixel count on the A7S3 is fine, as we talked about for things like social media or other online distribution channels, clients oftentimes intend to use photos for print advertising purposes as well, and this may require images to be blown up. Furthermore, high frame burst mode is another useful feature in action and even fashion photography. So that satisfies the photography portion of the Alpha 1, but what about the video features? The Alpha 1's video features are very generous on paper when compared to the A7S3. Although the A7S3 and the FX3 have something that the A1 does not, which is sharper internal 4K recording. And this is due to the line skipping readout present on the Alpha 1. In terms of the benefits, however, the Alpha 1 does feature internal 4K with a Super 35 crop, downsampled from 5.8K, so the image is overall much richer than the camera's internal 4K. But of course, this comes with a Super 35 crop. So I'm out here at Liberty State Park testing out different filming options for the Alpha 1, and what I'm looking for is any disparity in image quality between the different filming options. So we'll be looking at 8K, 4K, 4K Super 35, and of course the oversampled image you get from recording in 8K and externally recording to 4K. So let's get to some footage. So I'm comparing internal 4K on the Alpha 1, filming in 24p, And next I'll be comparing this to Super 35 4K so you can see the difference in sharpness and how the 4K in the Alpha 1 looks versus the 5.8K downsampled 4K. The A1, of course, features the heavily marketed 8K video recording, and you have it in 24p and 30p. And speaking of that 8K, when it comes to the overheating issue, it's absolutely essential to set the overheating setting to high. Otherwise, the camera will shut off on you when filming after like 10 or 15 minutes. On high, you can film in 8K more or less unabated, and if you require even more time filming, I strongly recommend the battery grip that allows for 2 batteries, which basically doubles your filming time. And it also redirects the heat outside of the Alpha 1. Now, as of firmware version 1.3, this camera can now film in 8K 422 10-bit color. Now, with all this 8K talk, this does beg a question, which is, who needs 8K content? I cannot think of a single instance any one of my clients has requested 6K resolution video, let alone 8K, which brings me to my favorite way to film in the Alpha 1, which is setting the internal recording to 8K and not actually filming internally. Instead, you can simply record the 8K readout in the camera externally to 4K on a recorder like the Ninja 5 Plus, resulting in a very pleasing, detailed 4K image downsampled from the 8K sensor. So this is 4K internal, 24p, full frame, no Super 35 crop, and now let's compare with the 8K. So right now, filming externally with that 8K internal, so it's an oversampled 4K image, vis-a-vis the internal 8K on camera. It's something that makes sense to me because I tended to use the Ninja 5 Plus with the A7S3 all the time, and now I do so with the Alpha 1, albeit with better image quality and finer noise. Now, noise reduction control is a big reason why I went with the FX6 originally, along with its servo capabilities, form factor, and the internal electronic variable ND system. So noise reduction, when handled on the A7S3, it tends to cluster. It becomes blotchy, and unfortunately it is not something you can turn off in camera. Now, the Alpha 1 also has noise reduction in camera, and no, unfortunately you cannot turn it off either. However, the Alpha 1 does tend to handle noise reduction better as the noise looks more atomized and it's less clustered like the A7S3's noise reduction artifacts tend to look. Especially when you consider video distribution channels like YouTube, which compress video for optimized playback, and in doing so, it tends to exacerbate that noise. If you haven't noticed, Sony has aggressively evolved their color science over the last few years. This evolution is happening so fast it's almost reflected on a camera-by-camera basis. The classic Sony look reflected a little bit in the A7S3's color science as it leaned green, which again, color science, it is a subjective thing, but I personally never really liked the green look for skin tones. The Alpha 1 by comparison feels like a full realization of that color science evolution as it leans magenta, and into my eyes, this Sony camera has the best color science yet. Skin tones pop and look natural but pleasing, and I would even say this camera's color science is better than the FX9, which leans a little too green in my opinion. So how do the A1's colors look next to the FX6? Because ideally you want your A-Cam and B-Cam to look more or less interchangeable, and you don't want to have to fuss too much in post. Well, you can take a look here. So from a color standpoint, let's see how the FX6 and the Alpha 1 look side by side. The FX6, while it doesn't have the identical color science of the Alpha 1, it's pretty close, and I would say they appear closer than the A7S3 and FX6, for example. So I've explained why I switched my B-Cam from the A7S3 to the Alpha 1, but does the Alpha 1 work for you and your uses? Well, it depends on what you need on most projects, and for my uses, the Alpha 1 compensates for things that the FX6 simply cannot do. And I would argue if you are filming mainly internally on your B-Cam, to stick with the A7S3 or FX3, as you will have a better quality internal 4K image than the Alpha 1's internal 4K due to the line skipping. However, if you tend to use external recorders anyway, you need pro photo capabilities, and you have the budget, I would recommend taking a look at the Alpha 1. But that's all for now, and as always, if you found this video helpful or insightful, give a big thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, comment below, let me know what you think, and I'll see you in the next one.